I'm delighted to welcome today as my guest on the podcast, Veronique Moorcroft. Veronique writes under two names as Nikki Moore, writing rom-coms primarily the Love London series, and writing epic love stories as Ella Allbright, notably The Last Charm, which had 800 plus Amazon UK ratings with a 4.6 star average. Her debut romance, Crazy Undercover Love, was a Romantic Novelists Association Joan Hessian Award finalist. She's also been shortlisted in the RNA Elizabeth Googe Trophy for 2010 and 2024, most recently with the opening of her next upcoming novel. Veronique has co-tutored writing workshops and also critiqued manuscripts for the RNA New Writers Scheme. When not at the HR day job, she can be found reading, binging Netflix dramas, or walking her two beagles. Welcome, Veronique. Hi, Veronique. So brilliant to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Veronique, I obviously know you. We've worked together, but would you let listeners know a bit about you as an author, a little bit about your books, just to start us off?
So I live in Dorset. I have a HR day job. So I work in human resources in senior management. I work full time, but I do it over 4 long days. So Monday is my writing day. I write under 2 different pen names. I write as Nikki Moore. It's really where I started my career. The kind of contemporary romances / rom-coms. I did the Love London series, which is basically 5 novellas and 1 novel, all set in London, as you might get from the name. And I also had a debut novel that was shortlisted in. I'm part of a writing organisation called the Romantic Novelists Association, which I will refer to as the RNA. So that debut novel was a finalist in something called the Joan Hessian Award. And I've also been published as Ella Allbright, which is kind of epic love stories, I guess you might call it, women's commercial fiction, very much in the kind of Me Before You, kind of Jojo Moyes, Cecilia Rohan area of the market. And that was published during the pandemic, which was a very interesting experience, but it was actually my best-selling book to date. Lots of lovely ratings on Amazon, hit some chart positions. And what's lovely is that given that came out a number of years ago now, I'm still finding that new readers are discovering that book. And I've been doing some events recently, and it's been nice revisiting and talking about it. So yeah, so romance really, but I'm also dabbling with a couple of psychological thrillers in the background. So kind of expanding my repertoire. Romance has always been my first love, but definitely room for other genres.
So you're what we call a traditional published author, which means that you've worked with traditional publishers who kind of take your book and do the work for you to get it out there in the market. For authors listening and thinking that they might like to try the traditionally published route, would you tell us a bit about your journey to that? What were the kind of big moments that brought you to publishing?
It was a bit of a winding road, really, in terms of getting published. So you're right, I've only ever been traditionally published. So I've been published by HarperCollins, one of the digital first imprints. I was very fortunate when I was a teenager to be handed. So I used to read a lot of Sweet Valley High, point horror, the normal teen stuff. But I remember someone handing to me one Christmas a kind of multi-book pack of Mills and Boon, and I discovered romance. And I really loved how kind of tightly written those stories were. And you had, beginning, a middle and end, and you knew that you got happy ever after. So my first foray into writing properly to try and get published, I wrote my first romance when I was 20, which looking back on it, I was incredibly young. And what did I really know about the world? That book got as far as an acquisitions meeting with Mills and Boon, which it was only a few years later when I found out more about the publishing industry, I realised actually that was quite a big thing. I hadn't appreciated at the time. It's actually incredibly difficult to get that far, especially with a kind of debut novel. They said that they'd like to see something else afterwards, and I went on to write a second book. And I don't think I got around to sending that to them, but I did submit it to a Mills and Boon author who had just set up her own romance imprint, and I actually got offered a contract for that second book. However, they wanted me to change so much that it didn't feel like it was going to be my story anymore. I know that a lot of authors starting out would have kind of signed that contract very quickly, sort of bitten their hand off. But fundamentally, I had to think about what was the story that I was wanting to write, what was important to me, and what was it I was trying to kind of resonate what was it I wanted my readers to resonate with in a story. And given the scale of the changes, I just didn't feel like it would be mine anymore. So I actually turned down that deal, which, it's always for me a bit of a kind of karma moment, because I had times over the years that I thought, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have signed that contract. But actually, that imprint went out of business within a couple of years. I then took a break from writing. I was building a HR career. I met he's now my ex-husband. We had a family together. I was doing HR qualifications. And then obviously, Isabelle, you'll know this part of my story, that I became really quite seriously ill in, I think it was 2007. I was really ill for a year, really, really poorly. It took a really long time to diagnose what was wrong with me. I got to a point where I finally had a diagnosis, and it was a stomach disorder. And the consultant said to me, if I operate on you now, you've only got about a 50% chance of surviving this operation. At the time, I had fairly young children. I hadn't written in years, and I remember having to have a nasogastric tube inserted, which is not a pleasant experience. And so I was really poorly in the lead up to the operation. I think it took about 4 to 6 weeks of having this gastro tube in to kind of build me up enough to have a good chance of surviving the operation. So I remember being in hospital and sitting on a hospital bed and looking out, I think it was views over Poole Park at the time. And I remember thinking, if I come through this operation and I get a good quality of life back, what are the things that I've regretted that, that I need to get back to, that I really love and that are important to me? And I've always been a massive reader since a very early age, and I've always kind of written in the background. And I just promised myself that if I got through this illness, if I recovered, then I would start writing again. And I would write seriously, and I would write to try and get published. So I had the operation. Well, there's a bit of a joke in our family. So my aunt is Sue Moorcroft, who's a Sunday Times bestselling author. So I think there's something about our family, kind of the writing bug. And she's always been a really great support and advocate. And she's always said, persistence pays. You basically have to keep going. But there's also what we talk about, the Moorcroft stubbornness. So I fought really hard, and fight probably is the right word, but I fought really hard to recover after the op. And when I went for my appointment with the consultant, he said to me, I've never seen anyone recover. It's basically 4 weeks, I think, post-op. And he signed me off as fully fit. And he said, I've never seen anyone recover this quickly. And it was because I'd gotten out of bed the day after the op with I was like on a drip, and I had one of those trolleys, and I was wheeling it up and down the ward, because they'd said to me, the quicker you move, the quicker you recover. And I think that tenacity to get better, that really gave me something in terms of resilience to then go, right, I'm now better. I've promised myself I'll start writing to get published, and I'm going to use this kind of resilience and tenacity. So what I felt I needed at the point when I'd started writing properly, so this would have been about 2009-ish, I needed a bit of confidence, and I needed to know if I had any talent. So I started writing short stories and kind of essays for competitions. And I think within quite a short time, I think a few months, I'd been a finalist in a competition for the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And I think I'd had a couple of second placings in short story competitions. And that was just a little bit of a nugget enough of hope, to kind of tell me, yes, you can write. You've got something here. I was then really lucky. 2010, I joined the Romantic Novelists Association. I went through something called the New Writers Scheme, which is basically a probationary membership. You can send in, it's fine if it's a partial, if it's not finished, but otherwise a full manuscript. It's done anonymously. And basically someone in the industry, it could be an agent, an author, a publisher, reads and critiques the manuscript. And I started getting really, really useful reports back through that scheme. Lots of really interesting critique. It's kind of critique that you kind of read the report and you feel like you've been kicked. And then you put it in a drawer and you kind of, give yourself a bit of a talking to, and then you get it back out again and you go, actually, this isn't so bad. It makes some good points. What do I agree with and what don't I? So I started going through that and getting some feedback. And then the Elizabeth Good Trophy, which was at the RNA conference 2010. And I think this is one of the highlights, and I think this just shows how important having supportive writers around you and someone who will advocate and tell you you're on the right track. I'd gone to the RNA conference, which was at Greenwich that year. And every year at the RNA conference, you can submit, anyone who's going can submit. It used to be short stories. This year it was the opening to a novel. But basically, there's like a round of judging. Everything's done anonymously, so no one knows who's written these entries. And that particular year, I'd gone along, gone to lots of seminars, come away, really, really buzzing. And I was on my way home because I couldn't stay for the evening event. And my phone rang, and it was my Aunt Sue. And I'd literally just been with her. And I was like, why are you calling me? We've literally, just left each other like an hour ago. And she said, I've got someone who wants to talk to you. And it was Katie Ford, who's obviously a massive, very successful women's fiction author. And, like I said, this 2010, I mean, I'd really grown up then on Jill Mansell, Katie Ford, Cathy Ramley, lots of incredible women's fiction authors. And Katie Ford said, I'm delighted to tell you that you've got an honourable mention in the Elizabeth Goudge Trophy for your short story. And she said, I was so delighted when I opened the envelope and found it was your name. And she said, listen, you can write and you must keep going. And, I was completely fangirling. And I remember sort of saying, I will, thank you. And then came off the phone and basically burst into tears. And my husband at the time sort of said, why are you crying? And I was like, for me, it was absolutely massive to have someone who was so successful to say to me, that I'd placed in this competition, and again, that I had something and that I had to keep writing. And that is something that, and I know we'll talk a bit later about, advice for aspiring authors, etc. But I can't underline the importance of having an amazing network around you and people who support you, because this is a really, really tough industry. And actually, at the moment, it's tougher than I've ever seen it. So I kept going. I kept going through the New Writers Scheme. I eventually went to an RNA conference in, I think, 2013. Part of that is you can have one-to-ones with agents and editors. You kind of sent I think it was synopsis and first chapter. We laughed at the time. I had the hangover slot because at the conference on the Saturday night, there's always a gala disco or a gala barbecue. And if there's one thing I can say about, and it sounds like a terrible stereotype, but it is true. If there's one thing about romance authors is we can drink wine and we like to have a dance. So Sunday morning, it's always that, it's always everyone's hungover looking very weary. So I met with the lady Charlotte who became my editor, and I just remember feeling very tired and just kind of sitting across looking at her and trying to kind of appear perky and I'm fine. And I had 10 minutes with her. And I was thinking, well, I'm gonna have to sell myself. And I still remember her saying to me, I love your writing voice and I will write anything that you want. Sorry, I will read anything that you want to write.
Wow.
Amazing. So she asked for the rest of my manuscript, and at the time I wasn't happy. It wasn't quite the polished, finished article it needed to be. So I said, can I take it away for a couple of months and can I send it to you when I'm happy with it? At the time, the imprint had just set up and they didn't really have a limit on the kind of format and the number of words of what they're publishing. So actually they were quite open to ideas. And I just, on the spot, pitched her. I said, I've actually got a few short stories, like romance short stories knocking around. What about if I send you those while I'm sorting out this manuscript? And she was like, great, can't wait to see those. I ended up sending those to her, followed by the manuscript. And then I still remember getting that magical email from her where she said, when are you free? I'd love to have a call. And that is the magical moment that aspiring authors wait for. It's that normally comes in the form of an email and it's like, I'd love to set up a call with you. And that's when you're either going to get offered something or you're incredibly close. And she offered me my first, I think it was a four work deal, and kind of the rest is history, I guess. I've been published since 2014, 2015. That's a really, really, really long version of the story, but I've still missed a lot out.
I mean, I love that you've given us that detail, because I mean, this is what I know loads of authors, they want to know what were the steps, what did you do, what do you know? And I think, and your story really shows us how committed you were to the process, but also I think clearly how valuable getting that encouragement from someone that you admired so much, which is a strong validation for you, isn't it, as an author? Because I know that loads of authors, they look for that validation. Can I really write? Will my work be good enough? I mean, it might be a difficult question, but what would you say to authors who are looking for that and who perhaps haven't had the opportunity?
I think that some of it is you have to make your own opportunities to a
Mm.
degree.
Mm.
I was always really aware, because Sue was probably a good 10 or 11 years ahead of me in terms of my publication journey. I was super aware that whilst behind the scenes, Sue would very kindly kind of look at stuff for me and give me critiques. I never wanted to kind of be seen to be riding on her coattails. And I've always been very, very clear about, if I pitch to publishers, agents, etc., I don't mention that I'm Sue Moorcroft's niece. I
Yeah,
keep, I keep
yeah,
it very separate.
yeah.
I've had to learn to create opportunities for myself. For me, it's been about, social media to some degree. I know some people love it, some people hate it. I don't particularly want to talk about all the different platforms, because, they change week to week, like what's popular, what's not.
Yes.
But when I was starting out, I think it was joining the Romantic Novelists Association. That has played a massive, massive part in terms of my journey and the success that I've found to date. Surrounding yourself with I called them my tribe, it's
Mm.
really important. And
Mm.
I've had quite a tough writing journey over the last sort of year and a half. I've had moments, I'll be honest, where I've just thought, I'm not sure whether the pain is worth this. And I've always had to pull myself back and go, you love to write, you love telling stories, there's a real joy to be found in it.
Mm.
But it can be quite isolating, because at the end of the day, it is you at a laptop clunking away with the thoughts in your head, the characters in your head.
Yes.
So you can really isolate yourself. So that surrounding yourself with your tribe is so important. And so this year I forced myself to go to the Romantic Novelist Association conference, which was
Mm.
held in August, at the most amazing, I can't even remember what the name of the campus is, but it was held at a university not far from London.
Is it the Royal Holloway one, was it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
know.
when
I'm
I,
completely, yeah.
so
Yeah.
beautiful. And when I arrived, photos and WhatsApping them to my husband and saying, I feel like I'm at Hogwarts.
Oh.
Really beautiful, historical. It feels like a very special place. But I almost wasn't going to go, because I had been having moments of, this is really difficult. This is feeling really tough at the moment. And then I thought, do you know what? Who will understand more than anyone what it's like to be an author and how tough
Mm.
it can be and how resilient you have to be? So I went to the conference, and within probably 2 hours of being there, I knew that I'd done absolutely the right thing. I was surrounded by people. And the thing is about the RNA, which is great, is it's not hierarchical. So
Mm.
yes, there is governance in place. Yes, there's a board, there's a chair, there's a vice chair. You've got different volunteers behind the scenes organising things. But at the end of the day, it's hundreds of people in a room together that love writing
Mm.
and that are passionate about romance, whatever kind of subgenre that might be, and having the opportunity to, go to seminars and tutorials and learn more. Because I always feel, because I guess the HR day job as well, like I'm always learning. I'm never the finished article. There is always more that you can learn and
Mm.
kind of find out.
Mm.
But going to those seminars, I ended up talking to some publishers sort of at the end of sessions that they ran. You talk to writers in between. I, at the gala party, it was quite funny. Everyone else had left, and it was me plus two writers who'd just come through the new writer scheme and who were finalists for the Joan Hassian Award. And I was telling them about, I was you, like 10, 4, 13 years ago, I was going for the scheme. And because I'm so passionate about what it gave me, I am now a reader. So I now read and critique manuscripts, and I have to send reports back. And that is me kind of, reaching down and giving the next generation.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like generation in terms of age, I just mean like the next generation of writers coming through.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
me trying to help them in the way that I was helped. But
Mm.
I definitely think find a tribe. I think be grateful for the people that surround you. I do think connect with people on social media who are in the same boat, because it really kind of helps to know you're not alone. And I was absolutely stunned. So I had a real moment of, it was like a pinch me moment when I was at the conference. We'd just sat down for the evening award ceremony, And it wasn't quite on a whim, but I'd definitely back and forth in my mind about, do I enter this? But I'd entered the opening for a novel into the Elizabeth Goudge Trophy. And actually, part of the reason I'd entered it, Isabelle, because of the work that I'd done with you,
Right.
whereas I was feeling a lot more confident in terms of my author brand and kind of who I am and what is I'm trying to say. And it just gave me the confidence. And I thought, you know what? I started out entering competitions. Really, I'm going to enter this.
Yeah.
And if I don't place, then hey, that's okay, because the people that are going to be entering this are all at the conference. They're a real mixture of people starting out, but actually people who are, massive names in the industry. Yeah, we went into the awards bit. Everyone sat down. I just introduced myself to the lady next to me. Is a lovely lady who writes for Boldwood. I just run into a few people that I used to know at previous publishers, and they started reading out the results of the Elizabeth Goudge Trophy, and they talked about, it was something, there were like multi layers of judging and lots of points awarded, and I think a short list of 11 people, I think, and then someone, I think it's a lady who worked for Amazon KDB or something, was the ultimate judge and picked the top 3. And they announced my name and the title of my entry, and I sat there, and then the lady that I just introduced myself to said, "Aren't you Nikki Moore?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's me."
Like who? Yeah.
It was a really surreal moment, but I think what will stick with me, I got a lovely prize. I've got a certificate that I keep on my desk. I look at it. If I'm having a moment of writing is really tough, the industry is really tough, I look at it and think, you can still write. But I think for me, the most important thing was I got up and I had to walk down this really long room, and there were like hundreds of people in this room, and they were all clapping and cheering. And as I was walking down to the front, I could feel, people touching my arm, and they were like, "Well done, Nikki! Congratulations, Nikki!" So I've always gone by Nikki in terms of my, in terms of my writing when I see people, and like all these whispers of "well done," and even when I'd have my, I was so stunned that I don't know how they got a photo of me, because I was just not prepared for it at all. Even as I walked back to my seat, I had people smiling at me that I'd been members of the RNA with for years. And when I sat down, I just thought, how lucky am I to be part of, it's not even just about the RNA, it's wider than that. It's to be part of a writing community.
Yes.
That is so supportive of each other. And I know that in some sections of it, people try to almost turn writers against each other. I've never felt that way. I've always felt like, and I'm a massive reader. I read ridiculous amounts every week, more than I should probably. And I'm a firm believer in, as a reader, I'm not only ever going to read one book. I'm going to read thousands of books in my lifetime.
Yes.
So as authors, there's room for everyone. And actually, if someone's writing in the same kind of space as me, I think, great, well, their reader might enjoy my book.
Yes.
So, I've always found other writers enormously supportive, and any kind of criticism I've personally experienced has actually been from outside the writing community. But yeah, find your tribe, join the associations, read writing magazine, read the bookseller.
Yes.
I think immerse yourself in the industry, but the one thing I definitely say is you need to learn your craft, and that's different for different people in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah. I'd just like to pause today's conversation to let you know about something very special I will be running for authors next year in June 2025. My authors retreat at the absolutely stunning location of Arddoch, a private venue on the banks of Loch Lomond in Scotland. This retreat is focused on allowing authors to meet with other like-minded authors, unwind and relax in the most luxurious, very private setting on the doorstep of one of Scotland's most breathtaking locations of natural beauty. The retreat gives you space and time to indulge your own creativity and to tap into your vision for your future author journey, goals, and success. You will be provided with an inspiring, reviving, expansive break away from your everyday world, to connect with yourself, your inner creativity, and of course, to have some fun with other authors. Workshops will be included. We'll be working on defining your vision for your author brand and guiding you through the next steps for your author success. We'll be combining these practical workshops with nourishing and nurturing practices, including yoga and a beautiful mindful walk. With the empowerment that comes from being surrounded by a highly supportive and welcoming group of authors who are ready to learn and grow in community, the Authors Retreat is a truly powerful experience. I would love to share it with you. Please go to the website buildyourbrandwithpr.com, where you can see all of the details about the retreat. And please do contact me if you have any questions, or you could be interested to come along with us. I think the point you make there about, if you're a reader, like I'm a big reader, you're a big reader, most of us in this kind of publishing, writing community are readers. We're not, and like you say, we're not just reading one book. And if we like one book, we might well like more books of the same type. So it's that sense of we're not creating more competition. We're, in a way, you're creating more opportunities for other writers, for each other, aren't you? By being in that community and sharing your experiences.
I think it's quite an interesting one because, I've been querying agents recently for a new book. Agents expect to see comps, which is, sort of comparative titles, because they want to understand where your book might sit in the market. I've always been a writer so if I'm writing something, I deliberately don't read in that genre whilst I'm creating, because I'm worried that I might inadvertently kind of magpie, take little pieces of other people's work and almost subconsciously kind of feed it into mine. So if I'm writing romance, I can't really read romance. I've got to just read psych thrillers and crime thrillers and gory stuff.
Yeah.
So when I finished this project, I was really looking forward to, I can start reading romance, and women's fiction. So while I was on holiday in July, we went on this sort of epic road trip across Europe. I'd taken 2 books with me. So one was The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood, who's an amazing author. She was self-pubbed for years. She's just kind of gone the traditional route and is doing very well with this book. And then the other one was a novel love story by Ashley Poston about a woman who ends up going into a fictional town, basically, a series written by one of her favourite authors. And I really enjoyed both of those books. And once I read them, I was like, oh, these are really good comp titles to my new project, which is a rom-com with like a speculative twist.
Right.
So I think, as an author, you're reading on almost 2 levels. You're reading as a reader who, loves fiction and devours it, but you're also reading as an author and thinking almost with the editor hat on. But I do think having an awareness of the market, knowing whose writing is similar to yours, and therefore being able to think about, who your target readers. But yeah, agents definitely expect you to know the market.
Right.
Pitch.
And obviously this is something that, I speak to the authors who work with me, I speak a lot about, is knowing your reader and knowing your ideal reader. And I know that for some authors, especially who are fairly new to writing, that feels like a hugely overwhelming question. Because they're like, they say to me, well, how do I get to know my reader? Lots of authors come into it saying, well, I just want everyone to read my book and everyone to enjoy my book, which is, fair. I mean, it's a kind of classic position, isn't it, for people that are starting out. But that ideal reader, after your author brand that you mentioned, you mentioned when we get into, well, who are you as an author and what do you have to say as an author and why does it mean so much to you? From there, it's then, well, who is the ideal reader, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's interesting again with like all the social media stuff at the moment and kind of the rise of BookTok and Instagram, and you see the way that people are, it's the kind of bloggers and reviewers, they're very good at kind of saying, I've read this book and if you like X and Y, you'll like this. And as a reader, I really respond to that. If I see someone's Instagram reel and it's got a Taylor Swift song playing over the top of it, and it talks about something to, I don't know, magic or fantasy, and it talks about maybe an enemies to lover trope, and it talks about colours, or there's just some stuff, there's some synergies that will just straight away as a reader will appeal to me. And
Mm.
I'll be like, yes, I love that. I've got to read that book. And it's just about, it's kind of pulling out those elements that appeal to people.
Yes.
Um, and,
Yeah.
and I've seen that done more and more effectively. And I'm thinking a lot more about that, particularly with my kind of author brand, and my books. I'm like, well, who are the kinds of people that will enjoy this? And
Mm.
when I think about, for instance, The Last Charm, I
Mm.
was really lucky because Claire Fenby, who was, I think, the head of marketing for One More Chapter at the time, she's now moved to Boldwood. She decided that they were going to do read-alongs. So it was a week-long kind of social media marketing event, and The Last Charm was picked as, it was the first book they did it with, and it was, lots of bloggers got advanced review copies of The Last Charm. There was kind of almost an element of competition where they had to do flat lays, which is just, in case people don't know, it's kind of something, it's a picture that it features the cover of the book, and then it has, lovely objects or backgrounds around it that kind of resonate with the story. There was a day that I took over the One More Chapter Instagram feed, and I kind of had to post some reels about my writing process. So it was this week-long thing. And I think the key, and because The Last Charm did really well in terms of sales, it was about the reader interaction. And I'd really thought about, who will this book appeal to? And I'd been through quite a tricky period of my life, suffering from grief. And so for me, it was really important to write a story that had kind of, that the elements were love, loss, and hope. And then I was thinking, well, it will appeal to people who have suffered grief or don't know how to deal with grief.
Mm.
It will appeal to people who find sentimental value in objects. So, The Last Charm are based around a charm bracelet, and the story of Layla and Jake, and the different charms that Layla gets to put on this bracelet. And each charm is about kind of a milestone in her life or his life in their relationship. So it was, it's people that have got charm bracelets who own them or have been given them, or it's people who find, that sentimental value and meaning in objects. And it was also for people who love Dorset or who would like to visit Dorset, because the majority of the book is Dorset based, which is my home county. And there was also an element of a kind of treasure hunt. So anyone who's got a little bit of a leaning towards a little bit of mystery. So I don't think I thought about it with that clarity kind of as I was writing it, but when I'd finished writing it, I started to really think,
Yes.
what are the themes and how do we unpack it? And then, when I knew that there was going to be a read along in this week long event, I was really excited because I was like, great, I can interact with these bloggers and then readers. And what's been incredible to me is, I think as recently, it's only a week or two ago, a blogger on Instagram has, sort of literally just read it. It came out like 4 years ago. She put a picture up of the front cover of the book with a Pandora charm bracelet that she's got.
Oh,
And she talked about how much she loved the story, and that having her own charm bracelet, it kind of, that resonated with her.
yes.
So
Yes.
I think things have changed in a very interesting way over the last few years in terms of the relationship between readers and authors. And as a reader myself, I am such a fangirl. I will message authors when I finish reading their books.
I
I
love
will
that.
tag them in
Mm.
posts. I will sidle up to them on threads and kind of say something, and I get a real thrill
Mm.
when they respond to me and interact with me. So one thing I've always been super passionate about is, if someone reaches out to me, if someone emails me, slides into my DMs,
Yeah.
I always respond to them.
Mm.
Sometimes I
Mm.
can't always give people the time that they would need from me. Some people want to kind of have an ongoing conversation with me, and between the day job and the writing and everything that comes with the writing, I can't kind of go into prolonged back and forth with people. But I'll always acknowledge their messages. I'll always write back to them and say thank you, and tell them why their message was important to me.
Yes. I love that that encouragement of the reader author relationship, and not being afraid to, if you've loved somebody's book, not being afraid to tell them that. That's something that I think authors are often nervous of doing. They don't want to contact the authors they admire and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I
But
mean, I think to some degree, for me personally, again, if I've had, if I've had a couple of agent rejections, or I can't quite get into the groove of something, that a chapter's not working like it should, whatever it is. And if I'm just having a bit of an off day, if a reader reaches out to me, or, I see something on social media, and the kind of, the nub of the message is, I read this book, I loved it, thank you so much, it meant a lot to me. That can be enough for me to go, remind yourself of why you write. You don't actually write to be published, you write to tell stories, and you happen, you want those stories to reach people. And actually, in the future I might self-publish, or
Yeah.
I might go hybrid. And I recently was thinking to myself, if someone said to you, you will never be traditionally published again, would you stop writing? And it was a really great way to look at it. And because my overwhelming instinctive response was, no, I am not going to stop writing, because I love to tell stories. And it might be that sometimes, they have to get to people in a different way. It might be a non-traditional route. But, I think as long as I have ideas and stories that I want to share with people, I'm going to keep writing. And I think as authors, we lose sight of that sometimes. I think we get so caught up in the whims of the publishing industry,
Yes.
being told no, seeing, you see all these things in a bookseller, people getting preamps and six-figure deals, but they're reported because they're not the norms, they're the
It's
exceptions.
extraordinary. Yeah. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we have to just remind ourselves as authors, like we write because telling stories brings us joy.
Yes.
And if we're lucky, they are shared with other people, and they bring other people joy as well.
Yes. It's really powerful, I think, for authors to remember, you don't write in order to get published. You write because you want to share stories and you want people to read them and enjoy them, don't you? And establishing that relationship with readers is so key. On the traditional publishing side, obviously, we've talked about what's more important, writing the stories than the publishing. But what have you found the most challenging thing about being an author and being traditionally published, or getting traditionally published?
I think that being traditionally published, I feel very lucky in a lot of ways, because the risk is taken out of it for you. When you're traditionally published, the publisher carries the costs. They bear the costs of, an editor, or the production activity, or the marketing activity, the actual kind of the print costs if you're in paperback or hardback. They carry a lot of the risk. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it. What I would say is that I remember when I was many years ago, so back to that kind of very naive 20-year-old that wrote her debut romance and just sent it off to Mills and Boom. At the time, my perception certainly was that authors then got taken around on little book tours, and they had their own designated PR officer. And so their only job was to write. They could just write to their heart's content, and then kind of everything that happened around that would be done sort of for them. The reality is that actually, yes, some authors might still have a publicist, but actually a lot of the marketing is down to authors. So I was really lucky, I had that read along for The Last Charm, but I always had to work incredibly hard in terms of creating my own opportunities, particularly marketing and publicity. So in the build up to The Last Charm, I think I spent about 3 months, and that was around, I think I was writing another book at the time, and still working full time. But I was kind of writing press releases, and I was pitching to radio stations, to local papers, to national papers. And I was really lucky because, I got some yeses and I got to do all of that stuff. But you kind of can't underestimate the amount of time as an author you have to spend doing things like that. So the publicity and marketing, the social media, needing to interact. And I'm talking less about like the personal messages between you and readers. That's lovely. But it's more about the general stuff you have to do on social media, and the posting of, I'm doing a cover reveal and here's my unboxing video. And
Yes.
it's all that side of it. And I guess that's the thing about, as I said, I know, I've got author friends who they do have a publicist, and there's lots of activity done for them. But the vast majority of authors, in my experience, people that I know, they are having to hustle. And I would describe it as it's a hustle.
Yes.
You're hustling constantly to try and sell your books, to try and connect with people. I think it's that. I think that if I ever embarked on self-publishing, I would have to learn a set of entirely new skills. I'd have to hire an editor and a cover designer. I'd have to learn about formatting and platforms and that side of things. But I would at least have that kind of marketing publicist. I wouldn't be a complete newbie. I'd kind of
No.
know that, but
Yeah.
it's learning how to capitalize on that and then how to make it even kind of broader and deeper, I guess, and
Mm.
trying to expand it more sort of nationally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's been a great experience. But I have found increasingly that everybody's journey is so different, and I know traditionally published authors who have swapped genres 2 or 3 times.
Mm.
Sometimes they're multi-published. They're releasing 3 different books a year, each in a different
Mm.
genre.
Mm.
I know people who've been traditionally published and have gone straight to self-publishing, and they will never go back to
Mm.
traditional publishing. I know lots of people who are hybrid authors, so they might have a mixture of self-publishing and then also maybe one of the big 5 traditional publishers, but also a small indie publisher. So I think it's a really, really unique journey, and I think
Yes.
everyone has to kind of find their way through it as best as they can.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, is there, with publishing or indeed with marketing and publicity either. But I think it's really, it's very important that I think that you've said that as a traditionally published author, that you have had to take control of your own marketing and publicity, because I think there's a lot of authors out there who think if only I could get an agent and only if only I could be trad published, then all of that would be taken care of for them.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, actually, Isabel. And that touches upon something that I've been pondering recently and spoken to. I was really lucky. I went and did an event a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lovely independent bookshop called Tea Leaves and Reads, and they started as an online bookshop during the pandemic doing those book boxes. And the last charm was in one of their very first themed book boxes. And during the course of the pandemic, they actually ended up opening, they did really, really well, and then they opened a physical bookshop this year. So they had a bookshop celebration, and it was myself and 10 other authors, some of which were properly best-selling. So like a Miranda Dickinson, Amanda Prowse were both there.
Yeah.
Lots of lovely authors, and we did some panels. I chaired a panel, and I was also on a panel, and I spoke to lots of readers, and it was really lovely seeing signed copies of The Last Charm flying off off the bookstores.
Mm.
But yeah, we were talking about how the publishing industry has changed over the last few years, and one thing certainly that I think, again, kind of going back, my perception was always that it was very kind of almost cyclical. That step 1 was you had to get a literary agent. Step 2 was that your literary agent got your publishing deal. Step 3 was you were published, and then that's it. No looking back. You publish
Yeah.
book after book. You become a bestseller over a period of years, and that's it. You're set for life, and you end up doing a lovely kind of Barbara Cartland lying around. The traditional perception of her lying around on a sofa with a PA typing up her story. And the reality is, it's really shifted now. There is no such thing as kind of just because you might get an agent, it doesn't mean you will have that agent forever. I know some authors who are on their 4th or their 5th agent for a variety of different reasons. I know people who have been agented and have decided to go it alone, and they're actually doing really well selling directly to digital publishers.
Right.
And I know people who've really kind of turned the model on its head. And I do think, as an aspiring author, if you go into it thinking agent, publisher, bestseller, I think it's going to be a bit of a shock, because
Yeah.
in my experience and other people that I know, it's a very kind of winding road, and it's not. I kind of don't see it as a ladder anymore. It's not kind of just
Mm.
like climbing up one rung after another. Sometimes you might actually be jumping from one ladder onto the one next to you, and then you might go down 2 rungs, and then you might go diagonal somewhere. And there's a book I read last year. It's called I think it's like the Squiggly Career Path or something.
Oh yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it's a business book, but I think that's a really good
Mm.
description of the writing journey, actually.
Yes. I
Um,
mean, because we still get, don't we, in movies and in books, we still get this view, as you've just described, that kind of, well, we get an agent, if you're good enough, you get an agent, then you get a publisher, and then you become a bestseller, and then that's the end. And I think, that story is still kind of told, isn't it, in sort of fictional terms.
it is, and whenever I watch I mean, I love films about authors and
Mm,
about book lovers, but
mm,
I do end up laughing at some of the ways that authors are portrayed in films. There was one recently with Lindsay Lohan. I didn't actually end up watching it because so many of my writers friends were just like, "This is really frustrating," and they, I think it's something, maybe he's the author and she's the editor and she's kind of written all his books for him, or there's something like that. And I just remember people talking about it and just thinking, I don't want to watch this anymore, because what was coming across is that everyone was just sort of saying this is really unrealistic. And I've watched a few films like that. And I know there's another one people are talking about at the moment. I think it's called Lonely Planet. And I think it's got Laura Dern and very, very attractive Liam Hemsworth.
mm.
But what I've seen is a bit of discourse about the fact that she's been writing a book for 2 years and then doesn't back it up.
Right.
And I just thought, and I think she's supposed to be a novelist that's kind of, go around a block a few times. And
Mm.
I was just thinking, you would never do that. You would never work
Yeah.
on it for years and not save it. But again, it is that's the kind of thing you do learn with experience. Like, I definitely, early in my career, I definitely lost stuff because I didn't think things, very early on, didn't think things through about what happens if his laptop corrupts or whatever. So I got into very good routines about emailing things to myself and, using Dropbox and all that kind of thing. But yeah, the way that it's portrayed in the media, it's either just really outlandish or it is just that kind of that very kind of linear
Yes.
view of an author's journey of agent, publisher, bestseller.
Mm.
Yeah, you just look at it and think, and I've become very passionate over the last year or two about demystifying the publishing
Mm.
industry. There's been a lot of things over the last 6 months or so in the bookseller, lots of articles about debut novelists and their mental health because they haven't been told kind of what to expect and what it's going to be like. And there's been things about author and publisher relationships, and there's been articles about royalty payments not being made on time. There's an awful lot coming to the fore, which feels like we're sort of slowly starting to kind of demystify. And I've always been quite passionate about that, and I've always spoken quite honestly. But I think, again, in terms of the work that you and I did together,
Mm.
and because we really get into the heart of, who am I, what is it I'm trying to write, and who is it I'm writing for, it made me really realise that there is a need to be much more, because I was being kind of honest with myself, that there was a need to be more honest with people who are starting out in their writing careers about the fact that you need a really tough skin, about the fact that rejection is not an exception, it's just a normal part of it. It's
Yeah.
going to happen. I've been published for, well, it's around 10 years now, and I still face rejection. And it's just part of being a writer. It's part of the gig. There's no
Yeah.
getting away from it.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, that things aren't always going to be a linear journey, but that's okay. The most important thing is to keep remembering who you're writing for, why you're writing. And I think the number one thing that anyone that wants to get published needs to know is that, you have to have persistence, and you have to have a real kind of commitment and a tenacity that sits behind that. Because sometimes if you thought logically about what you put yourself through, you would just go, no,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. If
Um,
someone said to you, you're gonna be rejected, you might not make any money, and it's so refreshing hearing you talk about it. And I think lots of authors listening, hearing from a trad published author the realities and the fact that you don't get to a certain point and then suddenly it's all plain sailing and everything's laid out for you. You're still having to be incredibly resilient and committed. I think that's what you're saying.
yeah. And I think that authors are often fearful of
Mm.
talking in an honest way, but I've definitely learned over the last year or two, kind of increasingly, that there are many people that feel the same way that I do, that feel it's a tough industry to be in. But I also consider myself really lucky. I've had a lot of breaks. I've had a couple of agents that I've almost signed with, and then I've thought, actually, this just isn't right. I've always been like, there's something in me around relationships, and that something has to be right to dedicate your kind of time and energy to. And I was actually doing an interview a couple of weeks ago for Bournemouth Writing Festival. And over the course of that conversation, as I was saying it, I was thinking, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but I realised that over the course of my career, I've actually turned down 3 book deals.
Wow.
And the host was quite surprised. And I was saying, like, I know, some authors might listen to me and go, God, you should have just signed on a dotted line. You should have been
Mm.
biting their hand off. But
Mm.
every one of those book deals, there was a reason that I said no. And it was because I felt at the time it wasn't right for me and my writing. And if I ever have a moment where I look back and think, oh, I should have signed, at least one of them, if not all three, I should have signed. I'm very much someone who, like, there's no point in regretting, what's done is done. You move forward. But I'm very, very pragmatic about things. And I just think if I turn down three book deals over the course of kind of 15 years, there is a really good reason that I did that. It's about having the courage of your convictions, isn't it? And also having a kind of positivity that there will be other opportunities, but I have to keep creating them for myself.
Right. That is a hugely powerful message. You create your own luck, don't you?
Absolutely.
Veronique, so let us know, where can people find you and your books? Where's the best place for them to go?
Independent booksellers will stock The Last Charm. You just need to come and order them because it's been a few years now. But I mean, primarily it's across the main platforms. So kind of, Amazon, Kobo. So you've got the Love London series, my debut novel, which was called Crazy Undercover Love, which was the award finalist. Anyone who likes a contemporary romance, particularly kind of workplace romance, would love Crazy Undercover Love. Leans very heavily into that trope. I've done a few short stories, but I mean, I would say the Love London series, if you are after a series of romances set in London around kind of keystone events and moments. And The Last Charm, if you're after an emotional love story set over the course of about 20 years, and if you like it's kind of an enemies to friends to lovers trope. So it's kind of combining a couple. But yeah, if you're looking for something that can offer escape, I think the main thing I've discovered in terms of my author branding is that reading is my safe place. And really what I've learned to appreciate is that the stories that I write, I'm really trying to give that back to people. I'm trying to create safe spaces for other people that they can have that escapism. I also, have realised through talking to you, Isabelle, is that actually that's something that's mirrored in my HR day job. It's actually about making a difference to people's lives, and it's about giving something back. So if you're looking for escapism, if you're looking for just a damn good love story, then yeah, you can find me as either Nikki Moore or Ella Allbright. I'm currently querying a speculative rom-com called Love in a Parallel Universe, which is very much a kind of sliding doors romance about a girl who gets the key to a mysterious attic. And I won't say much else with fear of spoilers, but she ends up having parallel love stories. And then the opening to the next one after that is what got third place at the Elizabeth Googe Trophy, which is another speculative rom-com set at Christmas, which I'm pitching is You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry meets the film About Time. So
Oh, wow.
kind of time hopping elements.
Mm.
So neither of those is available at the moment. They are projects I'm working on. And then yeah, I've got some psych thrillers I'm working on as well. I'm nothing if not prolific.
Yes, very, very busy. Keeping going, keeping busy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure going to be eye-opening and brilliant to have shared your journey and been so candid. So thanks, Veronique, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I would just say that anyone who does want to slide into my DMs, I'm on Instagram at author by the sea 1207. Please do. Always happy to have a chat.